Hey folks, it's Steve Cat5JUF. What I'm going to go over in this video is I'm going to look at some of the more specifics on some of the numbers that I collected on the Charlie Papa installation. So what's going on is I purchased new coax, um, DMX or 400, which is the coax I purchased, the DXE 400, which is the DX Engineering, and also purchased the Charlie Papa 610. So what I'm going to go over today is some of the math calculations that I've been doing because what I'm specifically interested in is trying to obtain what data or how much RF power is being lost in the transmission line due to two factors: coax physical attenuation of the cable, and then of course an impedance mismatch when you have a combination of a antenna and radio that are not tuned on the exact frequency, you will have some um, non-productive power that's not being radiated at the antenna. And this is where they go to with they call the standing wave ratio. So what I want to show you today is some of the math calculations I've done with my specific installation, so you can kind of get a feel for some tools that might help you figure out how much power based on a visible SWR reading that you can see on your radio, or if you have some antenna analyzer software, it might give you more information such as return loss. So these are the things I want to go over. Just some quick factors. These two things are very important in dealing with antenna calculations, power factor, and so forth with these two, your 10 base log and of course your anti-log, and I'll go over and do some examples of these. This is the coax. I want to review the data. So what I've got is essentially step one is understanding how much power are you losing in the coax. So think of that as building block alpha. Let's talk about that. So what you got to do is I am basing this on a fully balanced radio system, meaning I have a 50 ohm impedance at the radio. My coax is 50 ohms, and I have 50 ohms at the antenna. So what this is a balanced feed line. I have no non-productive power going on here. I've got maximum radiation. I've got an SWR of 1.1 to 1, or 1 to 1, and I've got 100% power radiation here. So with this formula here, I can actually calculate how much power, if I'm transmitting 100 watts at the radio, how much power am I losing on the coax? So here's how we do that. The specification from DX Engineering is at 0.8 dB at 30 megahertz is the dB loss. So I'm only using 50 feet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just cut that 0.8 in half. This is the number that I'm looking at right here. So I want to find out how much power is making it down the coax. So to do that, I'm going to do second log, which is the anti-log, and I'm going to press the negation key, 0.4, numerator denominator over 10. That's going to give me a factor of 91. So what that's saying is, if I'm transmitting with 100 watts, I'm getting 91 watts at the antenna at the end of that 50 feet, but at a 100% balanced feed line. So just keep that number in mind because we're going to take a look at building block Bravo, which is the SWR or the impedance mismatch, because that also affects our power loss. So we're going to look at that next. Now, on my Charlie Papa 610, I have an MFJ 225 where I use software called IG Mini. This software gives us a lot of good information, and what I've done is I've taken a sweep between 28 and 29.7 with the MFJ 225 connected to my laptop. So a couple of critical pieces of information that I see here. And let me explain what these lines are. The first line that you're looking at here, this blue line, that is called your return loss. Just keep that in mind. The other line here, that is your SWR. So that's the difference. So here's your grid over here. So what does this mean? What we want to look at is is the SWR reading. Now, this particular example, I did 1.32. And you can see it right here. So what we're doing is we're looking with the SWR of 1.3. Now that's a number that you're going to see on your radio. So the other piece of the puzzle is the return loss. Now this particular software here gives us return loss, but of course, what does that mean? I'll go into that. But let's get started. So real quick, what I did, I ran a sweep here, and what this is telling me is all of this area here is less than 2 on the SWR, and it's usable, but right down in here is where I have a really good resonance, right down here around 28.6, 28.4. So it's fully usable on 10 meter. So with that number, that SWR number of 1.32, I'm going to show you some tools that you can actually derive what the approximate power loss is because of the building block Bravo, which is the impedance mismatch, or the SWR higher than 1 to 1. We have an SWR in this example of 1.32. So what we need to know is, in order to solve for how much power loss is, we need to do a couple of formulas. So the first step is we want to do this formula here. And what this is going to do is this is going to give us a number right here in decibels. That's called your return loss. The next step we want to do is we want to take that return loss and we want to run an anti-log function on it. That's going to give us a factor. That factor is important because now you can take any power, for example, in this example, 100 watts. With this factor right here, that's going to give me a power loss of 1.9 watts with an SWR of 1.32. So that's what it tells you. If you have an SWR of 1.32, doing this math here and here, you can determine you're getting 1.19 watts reflected back to the radio. So if that's what's coming back to the radio, we need to know how much is going to the transmission line to the antenna. So that's actually very simple. You take your 100 watts and you subtract the 1.9 watts, and that gives you 98 watts. So what that's saying here is essentially you've got about 2 watts of power that are reflecting back and forth. They're not going anywhere. So you're losing 2 watts. But that doesn't include the coax yet. We haven't put the coax into the equation, so we have to build these two pieces together. So the last piece of information is we need to know what is the dB loss on the transmission side. So we're going to do this formula right here. So we take the 98.1 and we run the 10 log formula here, and it's going to give us a dB value of here. So that dB value is very important because that's going to help us solve this problem. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go 10 log, numerator, denominator. 98.1 is on the top, and 100 is, whoops, I messed up there. 100 is on the bottom. That gives us a factor of 0.83 dB. Now we have pieces of the puzzle that we can figure out how much power is getting from the radio to the coax with this factor here going on of an SWR of 1.32 and with a coax loss or attenuation of 0.4. So now what we'll do is we'll add this dB value. We'll add it to the coax loss. So with these two numbers together, it's going to give me a value of 0.483 dB. So what that's saying is if I have SWR of about 1.32, that's equal to about 0.08 dB. With the coax, which I already know from my previous slide is at 0.4, so I add those two together, then I get a number. So now I have to go back and I have to get that factor again. Let's do that. To get the factor, clear the calculator, second log. We're going to type in numerator, denominator, negative 0.483 over 10. That gives us a factor of 89.4. So now we're back to the factor again, but what's important now is now we have a combined dB loss, and the combination is with this here, an SWR of 1.32, and with a coax loss of 0.4 dB. So what that's saying here is, with this combination here, from the SWR mismatch, I have a 0.083, and this, I get this factor 0.894. So what I'm going to do now is, I'm going to take my power, and on this example here, I'm running 100 watts times 0.894. So essentially, I have 89 watts coming out at the base of the antenna. So with this formula here, this is how you calculate it. Here you have your SWR, you have your return loss. So just remember, if all you see on your radio and you don't have any of this fancy software, if you can see what the SWR reading is, you can do this formula right here, and it's going to give you the return loss. And that's a starting point. That's where you have to start. And then you do this formula here next. And then you do this one, and this one. And then with that factor, you can solve for your problem. So even if you had, just to give you an idea, that factor doesn't change. So say, for example, if you had a 10-watt radio, you could say 10 times 0.894. You're getting 8.94. Doesn't matter. The factor is going to be the same because we've derived that from doing all of this over here. So if all you have is a SWR number, and you have to know what your coax attenuation is. So that's a piece of the puzzle that you have to know. So you're going to have to, at some point locate your coax data sheet, find out how much dB loss is per 100 foot, which is typically the way they're given it. And then if you buy a 50 foot, divide it by 2. If you buy a 25 foot, divide it by 4. And then of course you'll come up with a factor. So you have a factor of 0.91 for the coax loss. So anyway, that's it for now. I'll kind of go ahead and stop the video, and we'll look at some other stuff. But I hope this helps. This is probably pretty deep, and I hope most of this stuff is correct. I'm just trying to learn all this because I find this stuff pretty fascinating. So anyway, I hope you enjoy the video. Thanks a lot for watching.